I feel like we as internet citizens need to bring more attention to things that deserve more attention. This includes bunnies, bread recipes, daisies, those cute little forest mushrooms, and fairies. When fairycore started to get traction on the internet, I think I appreciated it so much because it reminds me of the best time of the year, spring. It's a short time of the year that you can really enjoy the warm California weather before summer rolls along and hits you with a blast of sweltering, painful sun rays. But of course there are more to fairies than just online aesthetics. Fairies have been a central focus in art and pop culture for centuries, but throughout time we would see an evolution of the concept of fairies. How did we go from here to here?
Try to remember for the last time you're my servant because you're under a spell. You're not my spelling servant!
While I'm here, I will mention the fairy versus pixie debacle. Debacle's a fun sounding word. There's a slight difference between the two. Pixies usually have small butterfly-shaped wings, while fairies have wings that may be larger than their bodies. Pixies have pointed elf-like ears, where fairies do not. But still, in this video I will consider pixie media to be a part of fairy representation. They're both forest creatures who can fly. They're not like apples and oranges as much as they're like oranges and grapefruits. Media depictions of nymphs and elves will not be mentioned in this video. So now that we got that out of the way, let's find out how fairy lore started. It's not exactly clear when exactly the concept and characterizations of fairies came from. Fairies were initially a representation of a lot of things, including the children of Eve, demons, and fallen angels, the latter two showing that mythologists really can't make up their mind. One mythology of fairies stated that they represented a class of demoted angels. Rude. Another idea prophesized that fairies were also caught in between heaven and HE double hockey sticks. So maybe you could say that they have essences of both. The symbolic mix of angel and demon would influence how fairies would be viewed publicly. Fairies played an impactful role in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, depicting fairies regularly pulling pranks on the main characters. Fairies were then seen as small creatures that could be either good or evil. In England, a lot of people were scared of fairies and avoided going to places where they were allegedly sighted. The 1800s saw a comeback of fairy art, fueled by a growing fascination with the supernatural and the occult. This time, Richard Dadd and John Anster Fitzgerald were among the most famous fairy artists. Fairy paintings became a popular subject amongst artists and the public, reflecting a longing for innocence, beauty, and escapism in an increasingly industrialized and mechanized world. In this period, fairies were neither a representation of angels or demons, but rather showcased the importance of connecting to the natural world. So knowing that, understanding media that focuses on fairies makes a little bit more sense. Different types of fairies have been represented in popular media pretty much since the concept of the movie was established. And I think you might recognize a certain popular fairy that was established at the turn of the 20th century. In 1904, the public would be introduced to probably the most well-known fairy in pop culture, Tinker Bell from Peter Pan. So in the original stage production of Peter Pan, Tinker Bell would be represented by a moving ball of light. To keep the mystique of the fairy character, it was listed in the play's program that she was played by a non-existent actress, Jane Wren. HM Inspector of Taxes then demanded that Jane Wren paid her taxes. Tinker Bell was an immediately iconic character for a reason. In 1904, the demure fantastical fairy was the most popular variation of fairy characters. But fairies can also be sassy and mischievous. To be honest, I kind of like seeing these type of fairies more than the other type. Maybe I just like seeing a little bit of mess. The creator of Peter Pan, J.M. Barrie, describes Tinkerbell as hot-tempered, jealous, and petty. He probably didn't really say the latter part, but still, it's a good descriptor for her. In the musical version of the play, her go-to insult is, "You silly ass." She doesn't say that explicitly, but rather that line is delivered by musical notes. Fairy dust was later written into the story because too many kids jumped off their beds and injured themselves. To make them stop doing this, or at least make them do it a little bit less, it would be explained that fairy dust is a required mechanic to fly. In 1917, two girls claimed to have witnessed real-life fairies in Cotton Jelly Beck. To prove this occurrence really happened, the two photographed themselves posed alongside dancing fairies. The Cotton Jelly Fairies would soon become a series of photographs, and was one of the most talked about and controversial images of the time. Were these pictures real proof that fairies really exist, or were these pictures doctored? Public reactions to these images were mixed. Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, believed that these pictures were real. But a lot of people didn't like these pictures. X-ray pioneer John Hall Edwards really didn't like these pictures.
On the evidence, I have no hesitation.
I have no clue what he sounds like, so I'm just gonna assume he sounds like that.
On the evidence, I have no hesitation in saying these photographs could have been faked. I criticize the attitude of those who declared there's something supernatural in the circumstances attending to the taking of these pictures, because as a medical man, I believe the inculcation of such absurd ideas into the minds of children will result in later in life manifestations and nervous disorder and mental disturbances.
Sir, what is it like to just never have fun? In 1983, almost 60 years after the photos were published, it was then revealed that the photos were faked. What? Although they claimed that the pictures were just a farce, they still claimed to have witnessed real-life fairies. And given all the criticisms they got for these pictures, they never had ill intentions. They just saw it as them having fun. So evidently, paranormal hoaxes are nothing new. A century later, some things never change. In 1924, the first Peter Pan movie was released. Tinkerbell in this movie sort of looks like a small ghost. Is that just me? In the 1940s and 1950s, fairies were showcased quite a bit in Disney movies, shown as kind, nurturing sidekicks. But in 1953, Disney's Peter Pan showcased the most famous depiction of Tinkerbell. This girl is not nurturing or outwardly kind. This Tinkerbell is jealous, hot-tempered, and a queen of sass. When people think of Tinkerbell, they think of this design in particular. That's how impactful she is. It's commonly believed that Marilyn Monroe was her design inspiration, but she actually wasn't. That would be Tink's design model, Margaret Carey. I do think that the animators decided that Tinkerbell should have a little bit of oomph, for a lack of a better word. Like, micro miniskirts were not yet stylish in Victorian England or 1953 America is all I'm saying. But unlike the stage play, she doesn't try to outwardly unalive Wendy, but at the same time, she does try to manipulate the Lost Boys into doing that for her. Wendy was having a hard time in this movie. Like, even the hilariously bitchy mermaids were trying to drown her. These mythological girls are so mean. And then in the sequel, she would bully Wendy's daughter Jane. That's some Severus Snape tease. Soon after the movie's release, Tinkerbell would quickly become a figure for the Walt Disney Company. She would be a host for Disney's television programming, and would be featured in ads for Disneyland. Tinkerbell was just behind Mickey Mouse in the company's brand recognition. Again, this is a character who tried to convince a group of boys to unalive a girl, representing a family company known for its whimsy and wholesomeness. I have mixed feelings, but I'm more inclined to kind of loving that. It's fun to be sassy. And I will note that Peter Pan, alongside What a Girl Wants, sparked a fascination with London for as long as I could remember. And now all my dreams have come true. London is a 10 out of 10 metropolitan, and I will let the people in the comments section fight about that. After Peter Pan, we didn't get much fairy media representation, at least not as something as iconic and influential like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. But I'm sure they were a common staple for Halloween costumes, so there's that. But in the 1980s, the public saw a rise of dark fantasy. Though fairies wouldn't be substantial characters to these stories, they would still be featured in movies like The Dark Crystal, Legend, and Labyrinth. I also think that the dark fantasy popularity demonstrated that fairy tales can also have some cool edginess to them. And at the same time, fairy tale and fantasy media started to get a little bit more sexual. Why is he dressed like that?
Just fear me. Love me, do as I say, and I will be your slave.
Interesting. But essentially, on a mainstream level, fantasy is back! Yay! One of the biggest fantasy hits of the 90s, Hook, shows Tinkerbell return to the big screen. So in this movie, Tinkerbell's meanness is vastly downplayed. In this movie, she's more of a plucky, spirited tomboy. She's so smiley in this one. It's more explicitly established that Tinkerbell does have a crush on Peter, but he cannot return those feelings because he is a married man. So then why did he willingly kiss her? I cannot. But there's not much to say about her, really. I guess mean Tinkerbell can still enjoy being the fan favorite. I have questions about the I don't believe in fairies thing. If you say that you don't believe in fairies in front of a fairy, wouldn't it negate the whole thing? Like, the universe should just know you're being spiteful. Or spriteful. Get it? So the ideas of fairies representing a connection to nature hasn't really been utilized in a while. In the 90s, there was an increasing environmentalism movement, and of course an animated movie that focuses on that stars fairies. Ferngully the Last Rainforest was a movie that kind of came and went, but it's sort of a time capsule that captures the essence of the save the rainforest and recycle trends at the time. Compared to most 90s animated movies, this one is more openly political. A utopian society of fairies is threatened to be destroyed by evil humans, with some vaguely suggestive songs being mixed in. There's also a Tim Curry gas thing. Okay. In 2009, Ferngully would be talked about again due to allegations that the massively successful Avatar completely ripped it off. And apparently so did 2013's Epic. Whether it was a ripoff or not, I'll leave that for the viewers to decide. Are they... never mind. Mean Tinkerbell would come back in 2003's Peter Pan. This movie is exceedingly underrated, by the way, like everybody should watch it. We get another live-action Tinkerbell, but this time, this is probably the closest she's been to the Disney version. Once again, Wendy is being bullied by a moving ball of light. This girl can just not catch a break. Later on, Tinkerbell drinks poison to save Peter. The real world finds out about this somehow and proclaim that they do believe in fairies. And then she comes back to life! Yay! We're supposed to be happy about this, even though she's been acting like a total witch with a bee the entire time, but cool. And again, that's basically all I can say about her. But I will note that this movie is a lot of fun. Like, it feels like you're watching a moving painting. I also like how the mermaids in this movie looks like how mermaids would look in real life. And as far as live-action Peter Pan movies go, I think this is one of the better ones. It really captures the essence of the Peter Pan story. And also, this movie inspired certain segments of the internet to be thirsting over Captain Hook of all characters. Winx Club is a very notable TV show that focuses on fairies, and it's easy to see why. There are magical girl elements a la Sailor Moon, but this time it's with fairies. And this show was made for the girlies. The creators noticed that there weren't that many action cartoons that had a female lead. And yes, it is arguable that, of course, a group of female action heroes are fairies, but at the same time, a group of female action heroes are fairies! Work! There are also some techie, futuristic elements that makes for a very creative concept. And on top of that, the aesthetics are so beautifully Y2K. And here is where I'm going to ruffle some feathers. I never really gotten into Winx Club. I'm not saying it's bad or poorly written, I just don't find the characters or the story particularly interesting. But they do have a great sense of style. Great gowns, beautiful gowns. After Winx Club, there was Barbie and Fairytopia. This was the first time that fairies would be focused on in the Barbie movie franchise. I don't remember too much about this movie despite watching it at least 1 million times, but I can immediately recall the corresponding dolls, the perfected fairycore and Barbiecore universe, and of course Bibble. I had this particular doll, and it might be one of the prettiest dolls I've ever owned. Fairytopia depicts a coming-of-age story of a wingless fairy who gains her wings. This story brought a strong impact to fairycore because it utilizes most of the aspects of the aesthetic. Flowers, green natural settings, sparkles, and an underlying connection to nature. It might be a tad overhyped, but it's fine. In 2007, there was Bratz Fashion Pixies, a more modern showcase of fairies. Bratz Fashion Pixies would showcase the second time that the Bratz universe dived into supernatural topics. If Bratz could make genies cool and stylish, then why not fairies? But this movie shows different types of fairies. One being the good, kind, sort of granola girl fairy, and the other being the bad, wicked fairy, who lures boys into their doom. The bad girl fairy is probably the best antagonist in the entire Bratz movie series. These outfits in particular left a great impact on current styles and aesthetics. It kind of looks like fairy grunge, and I wouldn't be surprised if this movie heavily influenced that aesthetic. In the Bratz fan base, this movie is sort of a fan favorite, and I can totally see why. It has a mix of Tumblr Girl-esque fairies alongside the characteristic surrealness of Bratz movies that we all love and know.
What gives, my lord of the dance?
But is it just me, or is this animation a little bit creepy? I guess it doesn't help that the plot focuses on evil mind-controlling fairies, and there are theories that this movie is a metaphor for drug addiction. For direct-to-DVD movies based on children's fashion dolls, that's quite a lot. So I wasn't sure about talking about this, but then I realized, you know what, I'm gonna talk about it. So shortly after the movie's release, there was a small controversy. I saw this in a blog around like 2008-ish, but for whatever reason, the story seemed to be wiped off of the internet. But I remembered that I saw it. I think it was some sort of LiveJournal blog or something. In a few copies of the DVD, there is allegedly a scene where a dog was barking in a quote-unquote human-sounding way, and viewers were left unnerved. The movie's creators allegedly stated that they have no recollection of recording that audio, and they don't know how that bit got into the final cut. And I checked, and I can't find any clips of the dog scene or any articles stating that this happened. But I know for a fact that I saw it some time ago. What did that dog sound like? And why did it sound so unnerving? And how can the creators have no remembrance of recording it? And most importantly, how and why did this story get wiped off of the internet? I am now officially scared. So let's move on. Quickly. Yay, Tinkerbell again! But this time with a little bit of a makeover. Or at least a marketing makeover. In 2005, the world saw an introduction of the Disney Fairies brand, created by Andy Mooney, who also created the Disney Princess line prior. The Disney Fairies line was introduced as a series of books. We saw brand new fairy characters, showing fairies with different connections to nature. Tinkerbell was a tinker fairy, Silver Mist is a water fairy, Iridessa is a light fairy, Rosetta is a garden fairy, Fawn is an animal fairy, and Vidya is the mean girl. Not Tink this time. To promote the Disney Fairy brand, along with the movie series, the Pixie Hollow online game was established in 2008. I do remember enjoying creating my own fairy, and I loved the design of the world, but I will say it looked better when I was a child. For the first time, Tinkerbell would become the star of her own movie. Gone is the spiteful, scandalous Tinkerbell because here comes Tinkerbell as the nice girl. What is going on here? During this time, this new 2008 movie version is essentially a different character, but this story is set before she met Peter Pan, so eventually she will return to the Tinkerbell that most of us are familiar with. So this movie has some unique fairy lore. In this universe, fairies are born from a baby's first laugh. This completely negates the fairy's origin of being in between heaven and hell, but I highly doubt that Disney would even mention that. The story follows Tinkerbell being fascinated by the mainland, but is told that Tinker fairies don't go there. Overall, the theme focuses on finding yourself and figuring out what type of person or fairy one is. I only saw the first movie of the series, but the Tinkerbell movies are about as fairycore as one can get. All the characters have their own unique, interesting personalities, and we see a representation of a healthy, supportive friendship. How sweet. I hate sweet. Just kidding, just kidding. And it needs to be said that this movie was a big deal, or at least was presented like a big deal. This was the first time that Disney's Tinkerbell would actually speak. How she'd lose her voice later on is still unknown, and I have my suspicions. As the Tinkerbell movies continued on, there was some more fairy representation. Once Upon a Time was a fairy tale themed TV drama that, interestingly, wasn't necessarily geared towards kids. In this plot, Tinkerbell initially doesn't know that she's a fairy. She doesn't have any powers because she doesn't believe in fairies, and therefore she doesn't believe in herself. The subtext. In the show, she's pretty much a side character, but she still has some of the personality traits that the Disney Tinkerbell had. And as the 2010s moved on, a lot of the fairies in media were mostly rehashes of older media. Disney put out Maleficent and Cinderella with fairy side characters. And I think that's why fairycore started to get popular around 2021. The style seemed to have referenced media from Disney, Barbie, Winx Club, and Dark Fantasy. And you can see people online having fun with differing fantasy elements, also including elves and goblins. Did you know that there's about 1 million different fairy aesthetics? There's bloomcore, earthcore, mushroomcore, woodland goth, fairy punk, fairy academia. What's that? So thanks to the internet, it looks like fairies are in. Well, kind of. In 2021, there was the release of Fate, the Winx Saga. This movie was controversial to say the least. Instead of the upbeat, lighthearted tone that the fans love in the Winx Club, instead we get a dark-tinted, edgy Winx Club. You can tell that the writers were trying so hard to be a Riverdale Euphoria type, but inside of a fairy boarding school. This sort of reminds me of when Twilight came out and Harry Potter would then try to be Twilight in their marketing. But edginess is in and writers need to make money. But fans criticized the show for being poorly written, with poor world building, and for how boring it is. The writers made a show about fairy boarding school boring. Like, how do you do that? And then a second season of the show was never released, so the entire show ended on a cliffhanger, so yeah. One of the more recent movie fairy, or at least Tinkerbell representations, was in 2023's Peter Pan and Wendy. This movie once again retells the Peter Pan that we are all familiar with. And I will say, this Tinkerbell is exceedingly boring. She doesn't scheme, get jealous, or throw any sort of shade. She's just sort of there because this is a Peter Pan movie and she has to be. And this is a complete waste of Yara Shahidi. With better writing and directing, I do see her as giving a great Tinkerbell performance. And of course, some segments of the internet threw an entire fit when she was announced to be the new Tinkerbell. The only complaint is that she doesn't resemble the Disney version of Tinkerbell. I will note back that Tinkerbell the character was introduced as a moving ball of light. So really, Tinkerbell can look like however you want her to look. But really, in the end of the day, it's just a movie. It's pretend. You're an adult. You should know that. I love using that clip. But so far in the 2020s, fairy media has been pretty underwhelming. But at least there's still some fantasy media being produced. There's the Fantastic Beast movies. There's a new Percy Jackson show for the Percy Jackson fans. There's a Beetlejuice movie coming out in September. Wait, what? Here's the thing. If there can be millions of superhero movies coming out, why not we have a wave of fantasy movies? Especially with one starring fairies. I'm here for it. But I don't think that fairies will really ever go away. Of course, the fairycore aesthetic got some popularity online. Melanie Martinez recently used a fairy motif. And can I even mention that Janae Aiko video? Like, that was something. And in the near future, I do think that there will be a brand of new popular fairy characters. Just have a little bit of faith, trust, and hope for merchandise dust. And that's all I have for a rundown on famous fairy media. What was your favorite fairy movie or TV show? Me and Miss Peach would like to know. This topic was so much fun to research, and I might do another video on a different fantasy character. So I hope to see you all in the next one, and keep on sparkling. Bye!